our subject matter expert, Noelle Cerna, will brief us on legal entities, choosing the right structure for your business, best practices for record keeping, and of course, contracts. What do we need to have in place? Best practices, or working with independent contractors, and then payments and other details for our future clients. Let me tell you a little bit about the special lady and great friend to the WBDC, Noelle Cerna. Noelle is a Spanish speaking founding attorney of Cerna Legal Services, a law firm that guides ambitious entrepreneurs through business growth, strategic business purchases and sales, and complex contracts. Entrepreneurs who work with Noelle benefit from her big law and in-house counsel training and exceptional services at a price they can afford. Cerna Legal Services provides services that include business purchases and sales, corporate governance, comprehensive contract services, and trademark, copyright assessment and filings. Her ideal client is ready and excited to work with dedicated corporate legal counsel who will learn the intricacies of their business goals and act as an ongoing advisor and partner. Everyone, please let's give a warm welcome to Noelle Cerna.
Thank you, Felicitas. Very kind. And I'm so glad that you all had a cup of coffee before this, because I think legal topics in particular, right, can sometimes be, they're complex, they are dense. There's so much information that I could share, right? I could sit here and speak to you for hours about each and every one of those topics that Felicitas mentioned, but that's not the goal today. The goal is here to hopefully present you with some initial high-level information. I'm going to dive more in particular on the incorporation process, the choice of legal entities, why or why not you should even be considering that, especially as you're launching a business, because I think especially for those of you here that are in that process of deciding, am I taking this next step? What do I need to have ready before I formally launch? I think that incorporation process is key. So hopefully you'll walk away with a little more information there. So I like and I enjoy questions throughout the presentation. So I welcome that. I know that we have time at the end for questions, but if during the presentation there is something that sparks your mind, a question that comes up, I would rather you share it with me in the course of that topic that we're talking about, because then I'm sure others might have similar questions in that moment too. So please don't hesitate to use that chat and share your questions with me as I go along here. All right, so let us dive into the topic at hand. I'm not going to go through my introduction. Felicitas did such a great and kind introduction, so I really do appreciate that. But I will start with a legal disclaimer, as any good attorney should, that the presentation, of course, should not be construed as legal advice. It's designed here to help you understand an area of law. So in this case, we're speaking about certain corporate law topics, particularly the incorporation process, maybe other obligations you may have as an entity owner. And we'll touch a little bit on, like Felicitas mentioned, contracts and other considerations for starting a business. So please, the information is not a substitute for legal advice. So if you have a very specific question for your particular business, happy to speak about it offline, and we can find some time to do that as well. All right, so let's get started on this incorporation question, right? So I think before we even go into the different entities like an LLC, corporation, I think it's important first and foremost to understand at a high level, what does that even mean, right? What does it mean to take that step to incorporate a business? So when someone is essentially asking you if your business is incorporated, if you're going to incorporate it, what they really are asking you is whether you as the business owner are running your business as a sole proprietor, or if you've created a legal entity for that business. So I already kind of prefaced them, but examples of those legal entities in the state of Illinois, all of this is with the Illinois laws in mind. We have limited liability companies, corporations, different kinds of partnerships. For certain businesses that are governed by an organization called the Illinois Department of financial and professional regulation, the IDFPR. Think of service providers like beauty salons, therapists, you name it. There are certain industries that are regulated by that state entity, state governing body. Those businesses actually have to create a special kind of legal entity called a professional corporation or a professional LLC. So that's why this topic, I think, is especially important, because we're going to talk about your options. We're going to talk about why you might do one entity over another. But the bottom line here, the first thing I want us to walk away with as I start this presentation is that it is very, very much dependent on your particular business. The entity that you create may not be the right entity for another even similar business owner, right? So that's why doing that assessment for your own business is just critically important. So to incorporate, right? And when we do take that step, we're going to have to submit certain documentation to the Illinois Secretary of State. There's going to be a fee to pay to them to get that registered as well. Once you do take that step and you have incorporated or created that legal entity, there are going to be certain annual requirements to keep that entity up to date. We'll talk a little bit about what those requirements may be for your entity as well. So then I often then receive the question, especially from those business owners that are just getting started, they're coming to me to learn more about this topic. They want to know, okay, I understand I can take this step, but do I have to, right? Is this really legally required that I, as a business owner, have to go and create this legal entity for my business? The short answer is no, right? There is no law saying that you have to go create a legal entity once you have your business. However, there are going to be some pros and cons for doing so. But to backtrack a little bit on the question of why it's not a requirement, right, is essentially the moment you start commercializing yourself, the moment you start selling a product or a service to a consumer, from that moment, in the eyes of the IRS, you are what's called a sole proprietor. You are a business, right? So it doesn't matter if you created an entity or not. If you are selling and you're getting money in exchange, you are a business, right? In the eyes of the IRS automatically. So then the question is, all right, so I can either continue in that manner as a sole proprietor, or I can take that extra step and incorporate. So I'll just briefly mention here some pros and cons between those couple of options. So one of the cons, right, of continuing as a sole proprietor and not incorporating, and I'm going to start with, I think, what is the biggest con and one of the biggest pros of incorporation, they go hand in hand, is this concept. It's that when you are a sole proprietor and you don't have a legal entity, what that really means is that you, as the business owner, you are the business, right? So that means you, as the business owner, you're responsible for all of the debts, liabilities, assets, the revenue, everything, the contracts for that business. So the assets of the business, the revenue is actually, they're your personal assets. The liabilities and debts that your business may face, those are your personal debts and liabilities, right? So what's the risk of that? I mean, the main risk really is that if there's something that happens, I'm going to use the most extreme example of this, may it never happen to you or your business, but let's say there is a lawsuit. Let us say that insurance can only cover a little portion of it, and now you do have to pay out on that, hundreds of thousands of dollars in a lawsuit because you've lost. If you are a sole proprietor, what that means is that you personally need to pay that, right? You have to make good on that suit. That means that they could come after not just your business revenue and assets, but also your personal assets, like your savings, your home, your car, etc. Those are not protected because it is all one and the same. And we'll talk about how a legal entity shields you essentially from that potential risk. Not completely, there are exceptions to all of this. There are different situations that could arise, but that's really going to be the main protection that entity is going to create for you. And we'll talk more about how that happens with the legal entity. Otherwise, another con potentially of remaining a sole proprietor. And here I'm going to mention that, I'll talk about taxes to some degree, but I am not an accountant, right? So this goes hand in hand. I think legal and accounting, particularly when it comes to your legal entities and corporation and business in general, they go hand in hand. We work closely with our clients' accountants, because they will be able to tell you in more detail, am I paying more taxes if I'm operating as a sole proprietor versus the taxes that you may have to pay through your legal entity. There are different tax rates and ways that entities are taxed as compared to people, to humans. So it could be potentially slightly higher taxes operating as a sole proprietor. But I would be remiss in not mentioning that there are some advantages, right, of remaining a sole proprietor and not taking that step to incorporate. So one being, as a sole proprietor, you're not going to have to go and register the entity with the state and do the annual filing fee, which, the initial registration fee for an LLC as of today, it's $150. And then annually you pay $75 to renew it. So, I mean, in my opinion, yes, that $75 recurring fee, it's a fee, but I would say hopefully it won't deter people to take that step. If you're a sole proprietor and you want to operate using another name, right? We as sole proprietors probably don't want to use our individual names for our business. You will have to go and file for what's called an assumed name with the county. So you will have to pay something even as a sole proprietor. I think it's $50 today. We'd have to double check that, but you would have to pay to get an assumed name that then you can use instead of just your personal name as a sole proprietor. And then otherwise, once you have a legal entity, you will have obligations. And it's not just the obligations to renew it, to keep up with things with the Secretary of State. There are laws, right, that govern legal entities in the state of Illinois. So if you have an LLC versus a corporation, there are different laws associated with each and different requirements that you have to keep up with as the owner of that entity year by year. So we'll talk a little bit about what those requirements are, but that is still, it's more work, right? It's more to keep up with for your business. But in the long run, my take on it is that extra work that you may need to do to keep up your entity, absolutely worthwhile because of the protection that entity will ultimately give you, which we'll talk about shortly. All right, so I'm going to pause because I do see a question in the chat. So when you switch from a sole proprietor to another entity, such as an LLC, can you use the same EIN? So again, I'm not an accountant, so that's definitely a question for your accountant, but my assumption is that you will have to use a new one potentially. Check with an accountant on that. Don't quote me on it, but when you create a legal entity, that legal entity needs to go and apply for its own EIN number. We'll talk about what that is and what you use it for, but that is my assumption. But again, I'm not sure if those EINs can or cannot be transferred, but an accountant can help answer that question more thoroughly as well. Okay, let's move on then. Okay, so I previewed this as well. Okay, so why then? Why should I incorporate my business if it's going to create more obligations, more annual fees? What is really the purpose then of doing it? So I mentioned this earlier, and it's going to be the main aspect of why we're doing this is ultimately incorporating your business is going to help limit your personal liability as the business owner. What does that mean? So that means that when I create a legal entity for my business, when it is formally registered with the state, the business owner and the business are now two separate things, right? The legal entity is truly what is going to be housing everything with respect to that business. And I, as a business owner, am going to be the one authorized to take certain actions through that entity. So theoretically, the idea is that the assets of the business, the debts, liabilities are completely separate from those of the business owner. So that's what that means, to separate your personal liability from that of the business, right? So that's one of the biggest advantages of having that entity. So going back to that same example of a potential lawsuit against your business, right? So if you have a legal entity for your business, same issue happens, there's a lawsuit, you have to pay out on it. This isn't a situation where the lawsuit is against the business, not against the business owner, because here in the United States, someone can choose to sue whomever, right? So just because you have a legal entity doesn't mean someone cannot come after you personally. But let's assume they are suing the business. There is a legal entity. The business has to pay out on that lawsuit. That means that to recover that lawsuit payment, they can only go after the assets of the business, whatever that entity holds. And your personal savings, your home, your car, et cetera, are kept separate and protected from what they're collecting from the business. Hopefully that is clear and that makes sense. But truly, that is the one advantage, the major protection that legal entity creates for you as a business owner, especially. Other pros, right? And other reasons many people do take that step to incorporate are a couple of others, and this is not an exhaustive list, but examples are investors. If you are looking for investors to fundraise for your business, investors are much more likely to invest if there is a legal entity separating the business and the business owner. It's important. Same thing kind of if you're seeking grants and other kinds of opportunities such as that. If you're looking for WBE, MBE certification, a legal entity is probably going to be something that you're going to need as well. I mentioned this briefly, there could be some tax savings, right? Again, an accountant can help you assess better what those tax savings could be, but there certainly could be some benefits from that perspective. And then I put this point here of credibility, right? Is that becoming an entity, having that legal entity that is part of the business, that is the business, it really does establish that credibility outwardly, from seen inwardly as you as a business owner and your entity. Your business too, in having its own entity, like I mentioned, it's going to have to apply for its own EIN number, which that EIN number is going to be necessary for that business and entity to go open its own commercial bank account. You're really building up what that business is in the course of having that entity associated with it as well. Okay, so I see another question here. Is there a certain entity that's preferred when applying for grants or when seeking investors? So for the grants in particular, I'm not an expert on it. Even Felicitas or the WBDC are much more experts in the grant process, but I would say probably not. I think it's really truly not much different if it's an LLC, corporation, et cetera. Really what we're looking at is that whatever entity you have, and we'll talk about it, you actually are maintaining it and treating it and performing the obligations that you are required to for that given entity, right? So we want to make sure that that's called our corporate governance. We are governing our entities according to the law as well. When it comes to investors, I'll mention this a little bit when we talk about LLCs versus corporations, but I would say in some cases, investors that are going to get some kind of an ownership return or some kind of a voting right in the business, those investors may look maybe more to a corporation versus an LLC because it's slightly easier to issue stock and to separate different voting rights within a corporation just by the way that it's structured. But that again, very case by case, very much business by business. So if you ever do have questions about that, you are seeking investors, that's where I highly recommend seeking an attorney, talking about the options and getting more assessment for your particular business on that point. But great question. All right. So let us move on. Oh no, I think this is a little out of order. Okay, so and I may not have this slide here, but I just want to briefly, because we are talking about the entities that may or may not be preferred, I just want to talk to you briefly about LLC versus C corporation, and then I hopefully want to there's a misnomer, the S corporation. There's some confusion about whether that's an entity. So hopefully I can, you will be much more better prepared to understand this concept than others, hopefully after this. Very briefly, what are the differences, right, between an LLC, corporation, S corporation? So LLCs, probably one of the most common entities, especially for our smaller, more mid-sized business owners. businesses and business owners, their intent is to probably stay at the forefront of that business long term. LLCs are a very popular option for them. Why? And so LLCs, as compared to C corporations, have some advantages. So I'll explain them very briefly here. So LLCs, as compared to C corporations, don't have the same annual requirements, right, that a C corporation may have. So what do I mean by that? C corporations, they are required year by year to have what are called your shareholder meetings. Maybe even if you have a board of directors, your annual director meeting. At those meetings, you have to take what are called minutes, which are just notes of what happened at that meeting. You have to have formal resolutions and voting processes that take place as part of having a C corporation. All of that is required by law. The Illinois Corporation Act requires this. You're required to have bylaws, right? So all of this, nobody is checking in on you, right, on whether or not you're doing this every meeting, every year, until they do. So I'd say those are all internal records for your C corporation that you have to keep. And sometimes our business owners aren't aware they have a C corporation because they heard that was the right entity to form, but they didn't even know they had to be keeping up with this governance every year. But then all of a sudden you decide you want to apply for a grant. You want to get certified. So now those issuing bodies are saying, okay, I need to see your corporate governance records. I need to see your bylaws. Show me your minutes. Show me all the documentation you have for, since the inception of this C corporation. Well, now our business owners are scrambling to get that application together, to get those documents in place because they didn't have them. And that is where we fall into the issues of, where do I get bylaws? Let me just go online, pull the first form that I find, and they use that and present it. Guess what? That form, while maybe it'll go through the application, maybe it didn't even comply with Illinois law. Maybe it doesn't even reflect your business practices, right? And what your business is doing and how it's governed. So I would say, no matter what entity you have, make sure you understand what those annual obligations are so that you can keep up with them, do them right, and then you are prepared to take advantage of those opportunities when someone is requesting it of you. So alternatively, the LLC, it's popular because it doesn't have a lot of those requirements by law. Okay, so an LLC is not required to have an annual meeting, to have minutes, nor to even have an operating agreement, which is the equivalent of what bylaws are for a corporation. That being said, it is still great business practice to do that, right? I would say even if you have an LLC, and you're the only owner of it, even if you have a corporation, you're the only owner of it, do that, have your own internal annual meeting, keep notes of any big corporate decisions that are made. I would say that's still critically important. And above all, that operating agreement I just referred to, very important as well for your LLC. The operating agreement, which is really that document that explains how is this entity governed, how do I add new owners, how do I, get rid of one, what happens if I pass away, to whom does that LLC pass on to, all of that really important for the growth and longevity of your business. So having those documents ready, I think is critical, even if they may not be legally required by state law. And again, I'm not an accountant, but very briefly, C corporations as well have what's called double taxation. They may. That means that C corporations are taxed at the corporate level, so the revenue of that corporation. And then if the corporation issues dividends to its owners, the owner or the shareholder, which may be you, may also have to report and pay taxes on what you receive from the corporation. So that's why there could be that double tax. LLCs, they don't have that concept. It's a single taxation on the revenue that passes through, and you have to pay that on your own return. Again, an accountant can better assist with that assessment, but just to let you know that that's potentially there as well.
Okay, excuse me, Noelle, the
Please.
question popped up in chat about the L3C, or a low profit LLC.
Yeah, so there is an entity like that. I will admit, right, I don't often work on those entities. I'm familiar with them. I would say if you're interested in learning more, seek an attorney's counsel on that. But yeah, I wouldn't be prepared to dive into the particulars on that here. Yeah.
Okay, few more questions in chat. All right, so we did the L3. And what is the best entity if you plan to offer shares?
So shares stock, that's a corporation concept, right? So corporations issue stock or shares. That's the stock and shares is the same word, right? It's just a different word for it, same concept. So a corporation issues shares. An LLC has what's called membership interests. So the owner of LLCs, they're called members, and they will own a percentage, right? So that means that they will receive that equivalent percentage of the revenue from the business as well.
Okay, very good. One last question in chat. Of course, we're always going to say seek legal counsel when it comes time to putting together an LLC or corporation because you want that good professional advice. But in the event someone is looking for an operating agreement, is there a place they can turn for
Yeah,
a good template?
I I would say maybe the WBDC. I'm not sure if you have templates that you're working with your clients. I would say go first to trusted sources like the WBDC and organizations that work with business owners. I would say, please do not go online. Please do not go Google it. Do not go LegalZoom. Those are, I can't, they're tools, right? And they're affordable. And they're definitely good starting points. They could be, but they're also very risky, right? Because like I mentioned, they are not going to be Illinois law compliant. There are changes and updates to laws year by year. So you do want to make sure that what you ultimately have actually does comply with law as it stands, right? And that if someday I have to go to court and enforce this agreement or something happens where now we need to turn to it, we don't want to hear that it's not enforceable because it didn't comply with law. So I'm a lawyer, so I always think of worst case scenario. It's just in my nature, but it's because I've seen worst case scenario. So, I always advise go first to the WBDC, ask for their resources, what they recommend, and they will be able to point you in the right direction.
Right. And I echo that, Noella. We always tell our clients seek legal counsel. So it'll be specific to your needs, your business needs.
Yeah,
And that little bit of investment will go a long way in
it really,
protecting your business.
I agree. I really agree. So the question here too about what is an S corp, that exactly my last and next point here. Well, not last, my next point regarding entities. So S corporations, you will hear you will hear time and time again, become an S corp, like you should be an S corp, and accountants in particular, recommend that sometimes because S corps may have certain tax benefits, tax savings. I want to make sure it's really clear. An S corporation is not a legal entity, okay? It is horribly named because it has the word corporation in it, but an S corporation is a tax election. Okay, so that means I cannot go to the Illinois Secretary of State and create an S corporation. That is not an option. I cannot take my LLC and turn it into an S corporation. That you literally cannot do that. What you can do is have an LLC, a C corporation, other entities, and then you fill out a form with the IRS electing for your entity to be taxed as an S corporation. So there too, I highly recommend work with your accountant, make sure you get the right form to the IRS. And before you even send that form, make sure you talk to your accountant about whether it makes sense for you and your business to make that election. It is not a one time, like if I don't do it as soon as I create my entity, I don't get the benefit and I can never do it again. No, you will have the option to do it year by year. And you may choose one year it doesn't make sense yet. And then later in the future, because there's more revenue, you have employees, that's when it may make sense to make that election. So I always say talk to your accountant first, but don't let anyone tell you that you have to go create an S corporation. That's not right. You have to elect for your entity to be taxed as an S corporation. So hopefully that point is clear What is annual cost range to retain a lawyer for a single owner LLC? Oh man, I'm going to sound like a lawyer. So it depends, right? So it depends on the law firm, the lawyer, et cetera. For full transparency, to give you a sense of me, right? So when I work with my clients to create an entity, and it's not just like, here's your entity, we're going to talk through your articles of organization, we're going to talk about the name, make sure your name's available, not just at the state level, but federally. You want to make sure there's no trademark for your business name, which I'll talk about briefly. But so for me, it's a fixed rate of 800, and that includes the 150 fee that is paid to the state. So that's just to give you a sense, right? As of today's date, that's my fee for that kind of service. But otherwise, I mean, different attorneys charge different fees for that. But all right, any other questions on LLCs, corporations? And then I want to briefly mention partnerships, because man, the number of calls on partnerships I get that have gone wrong in particular is astounding. But okay, so just very briefly, if you are going in business with a partner, with multiple partners, it doesn't matter, one partner or more, please make sure you have a partnership agreement in writing. Make sure that you really do assess with an attorney what's the best entity for us, because now when we have partnerships, we can create corporations, we can create LLCs that have multiple owners, but there are also certain entities that are for partnerships. So you really do want to make sure there you have the right entity, and more than anything, you want to have a legally binding, legally sound partnership agreement in place as well. If you have an LLC, that operating agreement, it may act as that partnership agreement. But really the number of issues, like a partner is not happy, they want to get out, they don't have anything in writing. So now we have to rely on the law, rely on those processes, and then there are just issues that come up. So that's probably one of the biggest dispute topics I get calls on, are partnerships that have not gone as planned. So make sure you get those in writing as well. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go away from legal entities and a little bit about the types of entities, and just kind of preview, once you do have an entity, what should I expect, right? What may I need to do beyond that? So a couple of things here. So I want to start with this first point that's called a beneficial ownership information report. I am not going to go into huge detail, but you should be aware. Okay, so if you do take that step, you create a legal entity for your business. There is a new law that went into effect January 1 of this year, so 2024. It's called the Corporate Transparency Act. So not many people know about it, but really important, because now we have the federal government now, particularly a group called the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. So that's abbreviated FinCEN. So I'll just put it in the chat so you see it. So FinCEN, they take care of this country by making, they crack down on certain financial crimes like tax evasion, money laundering. And there are a lot of, unfortunately, there are situations where entities are created in the US for those illegal purposes. So how are they cracking down? They are asking all owners of these legal entities throughout the United States to go online and file this beneficial ownership information report. You'll see it abbreviated as BOI. So it's a BOI report. So what they want to know, the government wants to know, who is behind all these legal entities. So you're going to go on, it's fairly straightforward. They're going to ask the owner's name, address, date of birth. They're going to want a copy of an identification. Very simple to put and to kind of submit online. So I mention this because many people don't know about it. The Secretary of State has done better at communicating about it. But if you do not comply, and if you create your entity in 2024, you have 90 days to do it once your entity is registered. If you don't comply, there are potentially penalties of up to $500 a day for not complying and 2 years in prison. Are they going to enforce that? How are they going to enforce that? I don't know, right? But I don't want you to be the test case for it. So I'm just letting everybody know about this. It is new and important. Great question, Debbie, about if you incorporated before 2024, you have until Jan 1, 2025 to complete this report as well, but you are required to do it as well. If you have any other questions about this, happy to answer them as well. All right. So then otherwise, we talked about your annual meetings, resolutions, operating agreement and bylaws. And I briefly alluded to these annual reports that you'll have to submit. So every year on about your 1-year anniversary of when you registered, you'll have to submit an annual report to the state. The state will most likely send that to you in paper, so in the mail, which is, I'm going to bring up a very important point. Having your information up to date with the Illinois Secretary of State is very important. If you are working from home and you put your home address as your principal place of business address, you move, make sure you update that with the Secretary of State, with the IRS, whomever has that address for the business. We do not want to miss important documents that are coming to us for our business. I'm not going to dive into registered agent, but I do want to mention, as part of creating the entity, you're going to be required to say, who is your registered agent? What is their address? Registered agents receive legal documents on behalf of your business. If there is a lawsuit, if something comes through and you do not receive it, and there is a deadline to respond to it, you can automatically forfeit or lose, right? We don't want to be in that situation. So making sure all of your details, information are up to date, very important. And the annual report is something you do need to file every year to make sure your entity remains in good standing with the state. So very important.
Noelle, I have a question that often comes up with
Sure.
clients about agents. So you can use a service to act as your agent, and
Yep.
that will come at a cost. What are some other options for agents? Can you be your own agent? Can you have a family member be?
Yep, great question. So yes, the answer is yes. So the parameters around who can be a registered agent is they have to be, if they're people, they have to be residents of Illinois. They have to be 18 years of age or older. And they have to be available generally during business hours to accept documents on behalf of the business. So if you are you can be your own I'm my own registered agent. That is perfectly acceptable. And I use my business address as a registered agent address because that's where I am during business hours. So yes, I mean, you can be your own registered agent. If somebody is a family member in Illinois that can fit those requirements, can act as it as well. But I would just emphasize, whomever or whatever company you use for that, making sure that they truly will be available to receive those documents on behalf of your business, because you don't want to miss out on something important, like I mentioned. Yep. All right. How are we doing? Okay, not horribly. So just want to make sure I'm not missing out on some important information. I know we're close on time here.
No, you were good. We're
Good.
good
All
on
right.
time, Noelle. I think Christine, you had your hand up earlier. Did you have a question for Noelle?
Yes, I'm sorry. I wasn't sure when was a good time to jump in. I have a PLLC as a therapist, and have seen a lot of fellow therapists start another LLC to do other activities like coaching, which feels similar but also different and less regulated. And so I guess I'm just curious, as I think about trying to add other activities in addition to individual psychotherapy sessions. So if I want to do a group, if I want to offer, I'm trying to think of an example that would be like closer to coaching or less therapy. I'm a social worker, so it's like social work is this broad but also regulated profession. And so I'm just curious, not necessarily that you would know exactly what I should do, but more so like who should I talk to about the limitations of the activities that I can do under the PLLC? Would that be a lawyer that is specifically versed in working with therapists? Would that be my liability insurer? Who should I go to first to kind of figure those things out?
Yeah, great question. So I would say it's a combination. So I would always say start with the source, right? Start with your licensing authority, which is the IDFPR for you, right? So they are the ones that oversee that. They're the ones that do set those parameters of what you can or cannot do in your particular business. So I would start there. They have great representatives. They're a body of the government, so they're there to serve us too, right? To help answer those questions. So and if you ever need contact for anyone there, happy to share that too.
I was
They're a
just
great resource. Yeah.
I was just gonna say I would love a contact because it is so hard to get through on their normal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has
Yeah.
been tricky. So maybe I'll circle back with you because I'd love
Yeah,
a direct way to reach someone.
happy to share. Yeah. So yes, like any government agency, I mean, sometimes it takes a minute, but they're the first ones to really give you direct guidance and then keep records of that, of this is what they told me. But otherwise, I would also recommend speaking with an attorney, just getting that second opinion, somebody that is familiar with that particular kind of business and practice. Because one, we have the resources, like I'm mentioning, like I know who I can talk to, and we have experience seeing it in practice. So yeah, that would be my recommendation to you.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Sure. Great question. And I'm glad you have a PLLC because a lot of people in those industries aren't aware that it's a requirement too. Okay. So here briefly, so licenses and permits, my gosh. So licenses and permits are they're tricky. Why? Because it is so location specific for your business. So depending on where your business is located, the state, the city, the county, the town, you name it, could have different requirements of what permit or license, business license is what I'm talking about. Do you need to operate your business here? So same, like I was mentioning about going to the source for the IDFPR, going to the source for the municipality where your business is located. In Chicago, we have the BACP, that's the business, forgive me, I don't know the acronym, business something, consumer, they're the ones that really issue licenses in the city of Chicago. They have information about they're another example. You can talk to them and say, this is the kind of business I want to start. Is there some kind of a business license or permit that I'm going to need through the city in order to operate according to your requirements? So go to the source and ask your county, ask the city, the town, what business license will I need based on the business I'm running here? But again, it's so case by case. So you really have to do your research. Thank you, Felicitas. You have to do your research there. So Felicitas put in the chat, the Business Affairs and Consumer Protection division. So that's my recommendation with business permits and licenses. Go to the source, make sure you have the right ones before you launch your business. I hate to see when business owners launch, they didn't do their research on permits and licenses, and all of a sudden they're asked to stop operating until they get the right permit or license. So you can imagine what a huge interruption that could be. Already, there are going to be fees and issues coming up if you don't start on the right foot there. So highly recommend doing that research up front. All right. So in the time we have, in the most high level way possible, let's talk about these topics briefly. I'm actually going to start with the bottom one. So I'm going to start with contracts at a very high level. I'm not going to go into like what kinds of contracts, what clauses, legal language and clauses should you have there. I have a whole webinar and information about that. It's what I do. I help my business owners with contracts every day. But I would say if you are in a service industry, if you are providing a service to someone like therapy services, like coaching, anything where you are providing some kind of a service, put a contract in place. Make sure you have a signed contract with your clients before you start performing those services. Make sure that your contracts not only reflect your business practices, how you want to get paid, when you're supposed to get paid, what are the consequences of not getting paid on time, but there are legal clauses that really should be in your contracts. And I would say an attorney is going to be the person that is going to be familiar with what language should we really be including here to make sure, one, that you can enforce your contract if you need to, and two, that it will comply with the law. Because like everything, unfortunately, every state has different laws about what can or cannot be enforced in court when it comes to your contracts. So that's why, again, going online and just pulling whatever contract you find, probably not the best course of action, because something in that contract may not even be enforceable in Illinois. That contract is not going to be drafted in a way that reflects your business in particular. So really doing that work and getting that great contract for your business from the beginning, and then you can take that and use it for multiple clients down the line. That is an investment, right? Because you're investing in this document that's only going to get you more work and is going to get you paid on time in the future. That being said, a contract it cannot physically force anyone to do anything, right? I mean, a contract isn't going to pull money out of somebody's bank account when they're not paying you on time. But what it can do is give you recourse and give you the ability to send a demand letter. If they don't respond to that, we're going to court. And guess what? A judge is going to look at that contract and say, you have to pay them, right? So that's what that contract hopefully is intended to do. And that's the kind of protection that I hope it does give you as well. So maybe you're in a product business. Maybe you supply product to people, you sell a certain product. Same thing. You want to make sure that you have your contracts in place for that same exchange of product for money. If you have your own vendors, you have people that you need to buy things from. You have your contractor that's going to be your admin that's going to help your business. Same concept. We want to make sure there are contracts in place that are clear so that we know what are the obligations from both parties and what is our recourse if things don't go as planned. So no matter what agreements you have in place around you, make sure those are memorialized in writing. They're clear and they're legally protective to you. All right, so off my soapbox. So like healing circles and peer support groups, should there be a contract in place for these type of services? Yeah, I mean, if you're getting some kind of, I use the word consideration. Consideration is if you're providing a service and you're getting money, you're getting paid, or you're getting something in return, I would hope there is a written contract for that kind of scenario. So absolutely. And on top of that, different industries like the therapy business and therapy industry regulated, right? So there's HIPAA, there are other compliance matters that come up with different industries. So you do want to make sure if your business has certain regulations that really oversee them. And if so, we want to make sure we have the right documents in place there as well.
Okay, Noelle, another question. If you're using independent contractors
Mm-hmm.
to do work, should the contract be project to project or year to year or contractor to contractor?
It totally depends, right? So let's use a scenario of like, I have an independent contractor that's my administrative assistant, and I need them on an ongoing basis. Maybe it's a yearly contract and it renews, right? So that we still have that ability for it to go on. So that contract can go on indefinitely, but you want to put protections too of how do I terminate it, right? If I need to as well. So making sure you have the right termination clauses too. Alternatively, maybe you have a contractor that, like you're mentioning, Felicitas, does projects for you. Maybe it's a marketing company and you need them for a campaign every so often. What you could do is you have a master services agreement that has all the legal language, all the clauses you need, and then you tack on statements of work. So they're like mini contracts within the main contract so that you're not renegotiating a whole contract every time. Instead, you're just signing up, here's the new project we have, but all the terms of that master agreement, they apply. So there are different ways to structure that to make it work for your business. But again, it's very specific to your needs.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Does every service need a contract, or can there be a disclaimer or service agreement included prior to purchase that they have to read and agree to? Maybe this kind of goes to what I was just saying about the master agreement, and you have statements of work. That's one way to address it if the work you're doing is project by project with the same client. It really depends on the business, on the transaction. So if you have any questions about any agreement, I would say speak to an attorney first to get the right contract in place.
Right. Good, good.
Great. Okay, so great questions. Very briefly, intellectual property. So trademark, I think, is one of the most popular tag words we hear about our businesses. And trademark means we can protect our business name, we can protect our business logo, and we're protecting it federally. So if we have a registered trademark, that means if another business in California has my business name and they're doing the same kind of business, they're providing the same kind of service or product that I do, and I have the trademark, I can tell them to stop using that name, because the idea of a trademark is that we want to minimize confusion in the marketplace. So if we have a registered trademark, we have that right to tell others to stop infringing on our intellectual property. On the flip side, if you do not take that step and protect your business name, your logo, your intellectual property, and someone else does take that step, they might have that right, to tell you to stop using that name logo. Again, you can imagine the cost of rebranding, the interruption to your business, the headache for having to respond to those kinds of requests. So the bottom line for IP, make sure you protect it, talk to an attorney about how you might protect it. And I think there's so much value in protecting your brand, especially if you're putting it out publicly. Your intention is to grow. You want it to have a broad reach. The more eyes on your intellectual property, the more risks of it being stolen or copied, etc. So I think it's very much worth protecting. So the question on artwork, copywriting, definitely happy to talk about that offline. That's a whole separate topic, but I'm happy to chat about that separately. All right, so last couple things here. Business insurance. So yes, of course, our legal entities, if we create them, they're separating, us from our business. But business insurance, whether you're a sole proprietor or you have an entity, critical, right? So make sure you work with a great broker that's recommended, that knows your industry and business, to really get the right business insurance protection in place. I think it's critical for any business owner to have the right insurance coverage. Last point here, accountant, your banker, the finance aspect, right, of a business, planning for profit. I mean, that's the name of this, right? So having the right assessors in place, the right guidance on how you can minimize tax expenses, how you can take advantage of the resources available from a financial perspective, really critical for any business as well. How do you know you need business insurance? I would say if you have a business, you need business insurance. Not to put
Everyone
it
needs
really
business
simply.
insurance.
Yeah.
And please note, if you're home based and you have homeowners insurance or renters insurance, that will not cover your equipment, your inventory, your scope of work.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you provide services, I mean, we think of insurance and we think of property, right? And it's protecting things, but there's insurance for protecting professional services, right? And for advice, where maybe we gave advice and someone acted on it and something happens. There's insurance, but that's business insurance as well. So if you have a business, look into your business insurance. Absolutely. All right. Great questions. So that, at a very high level, it's what I have for you today. High level, truly, there's so much more we can dive into, but it's been a pleasure to at least be able to communicate this. I do offer a free discovery call. I am always happy to chat, even if we're not working together, attorney-client. I am a resource. So anytime, please email me. Happy to talk and answer any questions that I can. But thank you, Felicitas, for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure to have you. Noelle, you are a wealth of information. We really should block 2 hours for your expertise.
They would need a coffee break between as well.
Yeah, we'll need a big coffee break. But we are going to share Noelle's information in the recap email that we're going to send out a bit later. And thank you so much for that Calendly link. We'll add that as well for that free 15-minute discovery.